So very good evening to all. I'm Purnima Thopdin from the English department and moderator for today's webinar. On behalf of the IQAC and the Department of English, Jesus and Mary College, it gives me great pleasure to welcome all those who have joined us here today. The topic for today's webinar is Stigma and the COVID Pandemic, Testimonies of Resilience, Resistance and Agency. We are honored to have a panel of distinguished speakers with us, and it is my privilege to introduce in the order in which they will be speaking. First, we have Dr. Sheeba Marwah, Assistant Professor and Nodal Officer for COVID, Department of Obs and Gynae, VMMC and Safdarjung Hospital, New Delhi. Next, Ms. Angelica Aribam, founder of FEM First Foundation. Following her, we have Ms. Geeta Seshabani, Vice President of Friendico SECA and co-founder of Wildlife SOS. And finally, Dr. Mridula Tandon, President and co-founder of Sakshi, Center for Information, Education and Communication. We are delighted to have all of you with us. Thank you very much for taking time off your hectic schedules to participate in today's webinar. I would now like to request our principal, Sister Dr. Rosalie, to say a few words. We are grateful to you, Sister, for your constant encouragement, guidance and support. Over to you, Sister Rosalie.
Good evening and welcome to all our faculty from JMC, from other universities and colleges, students and all the participants. I am happy to welcome you all to this special webinar organized by IQAC in collaboration with the Department of English, Jesus and Mary College on the topic Stigma and the COVID Pandemic, Testimonies of Resilience, Resistance and Agency. We are honored to have 4 speakers for today. Dr. Mridula Tandon, Dr. Sheeba Marwah, Ms. Angelica Aribam, and Ms. Geeta Seshabani. Thank you so much to each one of you. I am grateful for accepting our invitation to share your experience and insights with us. Thank you for spending your valuable time for us. I am sure your sharing will enlighten us, make us a bit more human and humane, that we may add compassion and kindness to our intelligence, competence and efficiency. We have been listening to people, watching the television and hear about number of people affected by the corona. Number of people lost their livelihood during this pandemic, and the migrant workers desperately moving towards their hometown. Distribution of food, social distancing, there is a lot of uncertainties, confusion and fear around us. Our student community anxious about their exams, anxious about their future. In the midst of all these, first of all, let us keep ourselves calm, take one day at a time, looking to the future with confidence, courage and hope. Let us invoke God's blessings on each one of us and on the whole world during this pandemic. We pray for all the students, we pray for all the doctors and nurses and the volunteers and all others who do their best, who work their hard to keep us safe and healthy. We pray for our governments and all those who make important decisions and make plans for future. Lord, bless all our endeavors to do good. Make our earth a beautiful home for all of us. On this occasion, I congratulate the Department of English. A big thank you to Ms. Dolly Kapoor, PIC of the department, Dr. Purnima Topton, Dr. Sharon, Dr. Jennifer, Mrs. Amrita Balla, Dr. Ishida, and all the others given time to organize this webinar. Thank you also Dr. Alka Marwah, the IQAC coordinator, Dr. Amida Motwani, the convener of the webinar team, Dr. Renu Gupta, the member of IQAC, Dr. Alka Segal, IQAC member. A big thank you also to Dr. Naveen, Christo, and Ms. Vinta, Ms. Shika Singh, Ms. Megha, and all the others who have continued to give us the support or the technical help so that we are able to conduct this webinar successfully. Thank you and God bless you.
Thank you, Sister Rosalie. Thank you very much. In ancient Greek society,
yes, well, thank you.
Stipend was the... Okay, thank you, Sister. Should I begin now? Okay. So in ancient Greek society, yes, stipend was a mark, as all of us know, that was branded on slaves to identify them and to devalue them. The modern derivative of the word stipend is of course stigma, and it is therefore associated with the recognition of some sort of a differentiating marker and the subsequent social disgrace that is attached to it. Goffman, in his seminal 1963 text, Stigma, Notes on the Management of a Spoiled Identity, defines it as an attribute that is deeply discrediting. Since the topic for today is stigma and the COVID pandemic, let us first look at infectious disease, or ID stigmas as they are called. Evolutionary psychologists argue that not just ID stigmas, but in fact all stigmas evolved from disease avoidance mechanisms. Human beings generate stigmas for and tend to stigmatize those groups and those people whom they consider as a threat to effective group functioning. Once upon a time regarded as an adaptive tool for the social defense of the larger group, in modern times it is a well-established fact that stigmas, on the contrary, problematize disease dynamics in complex ways and act as catalysts for failures in protecting public health. There's this very, very interesting book called 12 Diseases That Changed Our World by Sherman, published in 2007. In that, he examines not just the historical repercussions of major diseases like leprosy, TB, HIV, and so on and so forth, but also the very interesting stigmatization patterns attached to each of these diseases. The intersection of disease and discrimination exacerbates the spread of the disease and the infection and creates a host of all kinds of absolutely unnecessary problems. Ever since the first case of COVID was detected in India on the 30th of January 2020, we have been witnessing all these problems, all around us. First and foremost is, of course, the impact of the disease on the victim or the patient itself. Okay. And many patients have reported that the fear of stigmatization is often more devastating than the disease itself. And we're very, very familiar with this narrative. So many people have succumbed to depression and anxiety, and many people have also committed suicide. All of these are also, stigmatized per se. The second, very kind of important point here is that stigma makes the disease go underground, so to speak, right? It makes people completely run away and hide from the healthcare system, making it much more difficult for the healthcare authorities to control its spread. And the third point brings us closer to our topic, and this is that stigma causes discrimination against entire groups, and especially those that are very, very vulnerable and susceptible. Here, I would like to refer briefly to Link and Phelan's review of stigma in the review of sociology, the annual review of sociology of 2001. Link and Phelan draw on Goffman, but they link stigma to the more macro level concerns, like the role and operation of power dynamics and the processes of exploitation and domination in society. In India, we have seen some horrific dramas related to the COVID stigma attaching to already stigmatized groups along lines of caste, class, religion, profession, ethnicity, gender, and so on and so forth in the last 5 months alone. We have not even spared innocent animals. COVID in India has spawned in its wake panic and fear at the individual level, at the community level, and also at the national level. To my mind, it lends itself to a very, very exaggerated stigma response because number one, it is highly contagious. I mean, I don't think we can have it worse. You can get it by just inhaling air, which is, infected with droplets of, the virus. And number two, it's still unknown. Therefore, it becomes extremely fearful. And number three, the race for the vaccine with the accompanying global lobbying is still on. And in very serious cases, we don't have a treatment in hand as yet. Add to this, you have constant warnings being issued. While we all agree that these are extremely necessary, ironically, these warnings also add to the frenzy. This is a heavy mixture, and on top of that, you have sensationalist media reporting, you have misinformation, you have the use of a criminalizing vocabulary, and in no time at all, social distancing has morphed into a very, very ugly avatar. And you have shunning, isolating, abandoning, and attacking of entire groups. We began by discussing stigma as a mark of identification and disgrace, right? So in the case of ID stigmas or infectious disease stigmas, the disgrace lies, of course, simply, in being infected with the contagious disease. And as far as identification is concerned, identification of the carriers and super spreaders and so on and so forth, I'm afraid that we have evolved far more complex and sophisticated mechanisms today, like digital tracking, contact tracing, home quarantine stamps, and so on and so forth. Somewhere along the way, of course, the right to confidentiality has gone for a complete toss. Each time someone contracts the disease, literally shock waves start radiating out of the housing complex into the locality and into the nation at large. COVID cases in India are on the rise. We are all in it together. The types of stigma that we will cover today are neither exhaustive nor indeed representative. While it's become imperative to continue to fight for better policy decisions and better legislation, to be able to envision a better future, we must begin by listening to the voices of the most impacted. Our first speaker for the day is Dr. Sheeba Marwah. Dr. Sheeba, Assistant Professor at Safdarjung Hospital, is also the Joint Organizing Secretary of IFCPC 2020, CME Coordinator and Co-Web Editor NARCHI 2018 to 20, Chairperson of Menstrual Disorders Committee-SMDHM. She has 36 papers published in national and international journals and has won numerous prestigious prizes for her work, the most recent being the C.S. Dawn Prize for her oral paper at the 63rd AICOG 2020, Lucknow. While most of us watch the rise of the COVID cases from afar and are filled with trepidation and fear, Dr. Sheeba and many other healthcare workers like her are working round the clock inside the specially designated COVID building of Safdarjung Hospital. We can't get more frontline in the fight against COVID than Dr. Sheeba. Let's hear her story. Over to Dr. Sheeba.
Thank you, ma'am, for that kind introduction.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. Well, as ma'am has already outlined, that COVID-19 pandemic is a public health emergency which we all are facing, and it is causing a stressful and difficult time for everyone. During this crisis, rumors and misinformation create more stress and can hamper the recovery of coronavirus disease 19 patients all over the world. The COVID-19 pandemic has already created a lot of havoc in both the terms of number of new cases and also deaths worldwide. But the world seems scary to all of us right now because of the stress, the anxiety, the panic, the fear, the uncertainty. The levels are all running high. Why is there stigma? The stigma associated with COVID-19 is based upon three main factors. That is lack of adequate information, rumors of misinformation, and most important, the fear of contracting the disease. What happens with when one has stigma and discrimination? People start concealing symptoms. That's what we have seen in our daily practice. There is also reluctance in seeking medical care. People are not adhering to interventions like home quarantine as they've been advised. There is an increased sense of emotional isolation, feeling of guilt and anxiety. There is lack of self-esteem and confidence. Besides, ostracization of healthcare workers like us and others who are involved in COVID-19 patient management care all around. Worsening of pre-existing psychiatric illness surfaces such as depression. So, as a consequence, this may all lead to COVID-19 cases not being reported or reported late in the hospitals, making management of the outbreaks even more difficult. And there is a diversion from the required preventive measures which needs to be undertaken. So, who are the victims of this stigma? People who are actually affected with COVID-19, their families, their caregivers, their friends. People who are under quarantine, and even their families. Those who have already recovered from COVID-19, the migrant workers, and most importantly, the frontline healthcare providers like doctors, nurses, paramedics, field workers, hospital staff, and sanitation workers. The healthcare workers are at the front line of the COVID-19 outbreak response and as such exposed to the infectious morbidity. Besides, they have long working hours, psychological distress, fatigue, occupational burnout, and now the stigma and physical psychological violence, all thanks to media and misreporting. That's all we know that coronavirus stigma is growing leaps and bounds. Every day we are hearing the stories that the stigma is the only other enemy which we all doctors who are already overworked in India face in this battle against coronavirus disease. India's under-supported force of healthcare professionals is definitely crumbling under this stigma. Before I go ahead, I would like to say that just as the warriors are sent to battlefield, all fully equipped with ammunition, even the doctors and the health workers are sent to work for this COVID-19 disease, well equipped with the personal protective equipment, that is the PPE, that is our ammunition. So this PPE, it provides all healthcare workers against protection against respiratory diseases, the eye protection, the body protection, and the hand protection. But the components of PPE, including the goggles, the face shield, the gloves, the N95 surgical mask, and the hazmat suit per se, it's not that easy to wear. Well, there is different kind of PPE at different workstations in the hospital. Like this is what we wear in an OPD setup. This is what we wear in a labor room or a delivery suite. And when we go to the OT or the Corona ICU, where the maximum risk of contracting infection is there, we don up completely. There are guidance on donning or removing the personal protective equipment laid by the ministry, which we strictly follow and have to follow, especially for the doffing, where is the risk of contracting infection maximum and spreading also. But this PPE, as I've already said, is very uncomfortable to wear. There is difficulty in maintaining the tactile sensitivity through the gloves. It often is of poor fit and it's too hot to wear it, and we get drenched in sweat even after wearing it for 1 hour. There is often misty vision, and once we remove it, there are rashes all over the face. Difficulty in breathing is there, and these are the sodden hands which we often get even after wearing it for as short as half an hour or 1 hour. There are difficulties in verbal communication also between the team in the operation theatre. So we have to develop sign language to communicate with our colleagues. Now, what happens when there is a breach in PPE or even after taking all the precautions, a healthcare worker is exposed and contracts the disease? Well, the exposure is there, and then comes the ordeal. Surviving COVID-19, this is my narrative. My COVID duty started with a bang, all set to operate, where I operated patients who were COVID positive, managed them completely. Just as routine, my testing was done at the end of my duty. But surprise, surprise, my report said SARS-CoV virus was detected. Well, the initial reaction was of denial, as always. But later on, I had to accept because I had to move forward. Conveying this to my family members was another ordeal. The initial reactions, well, they were disheartened, they were saddened. My mother was tearful. Later on, they were fearful. Why? Because of the stigma, the ostracization, the news they kept hearing all over from home. And moreover, I was a single woman. I am a single woman living all alone. And how would I manage? They were definitely worried. Informing my department seniors was not that difficult, but they were worried for me and they were very supportive and they guided me to take decision. My final decision was home isolation as per Government of India guidelines. But the next task was informing my landlady and my neighbors. Well, that was really a task. I informed them. There were mixed reactions again. The RWA members were though a bit apprehensive, but very supportive, appreciating it to be an occupational hazard we all face doing the noble work. But landlady was quite unsupportive. She wanted to throw me out at all costs, complained wherever possible she could. But thanks to the Epidemic Act, it was all in vain. Well, the next few days also had a lot of challenges. Seeking food, management of my daily chores, who would be my caregiver, how would I dispose of my waste? Well, I went through all of them. But the angels in my life were my supportive Resident Welfare Association members, my wonderful neighbors, my friends, my family, and my highly supportive department faculty, my home away from home. They kept on encouraging me, kept me busy, regularly appraised of my health. And also, self-isolation doesn't have to be isolating from world. I was connected by my friends, my family, by staying in touch through video chat. I kept working as a Nodal Officer from home, occasionally binging on movies and web series whenever I had a little time to myself, trying to support the other people, other doctors, other healthcare workers in my hospital who were also affected through my experiences. And thus, my 17 days went on smoothly. And now I can proudly say that I am a Corona survivor. But here's a shout out to all my healthcare workers all across India who are facing this stigma and this discrimination. Stress and the feelings associated with it are by no means a reflection that we cannot do our job or that we are weak. Feeling under pressure is a likely experience for all of us. It's quite normal to be feeling this way in the current situation. But what is expected from you, the common man? Well, we all say, protect yourselves by following all the preventive measures you've been hearing all this while. Physical distancing, washing hands frequently, cover, mask yourself. But despite all precautions, if any person contracts COVID-19, it is not his or her fault. Anyone is susceptible to contract the disease and no one needs to be blamed. And in situations of distress, the patient and the family need support and cooperation. Be a well-wisher to those who are in isolation and quarantine. Extend your hand to support them and their families. Testing, isolation, and quarantine are meant all to protect the family and in long term, the community itself. Celebrate persons like me who have recovered from COVID-19 as winners. They do not have the virus anymore and there is no risk of transmission now. Keep on practicing the measures to prevent COVID-19. This pandemic has to be fought in the mind altogether. And some more tips to reduce the stigma related to COVID-19. I would reiterate, be appreciative and supportive of efforts made by all frontline health workers. Verify the information from a reliable source like Ministry's website before sharing or forwarding the same. And share only positive stories of those who have recovered from COVID-19, just like I shared mine. Do not spread misinformation. Do not label any individual, group, or area for spread of COVID-19. And do not spread name, identity, or locality of persons who are affected or under quarantine. This right kind of mental health support can help foster resilience, giving the healthcare workers and patients the ability and confidence to manage stressors in the future. But this is an ongoing process. So it's going to be a long haul before we can say bye bye corona, and it has to be the survival of the fittest. And together we are all against this fight in COVID-19. But stop stigmatizing and start empathizing. We still have the same opportunity for happiness that we did before the coronavirus pandemic came over. We are just being encouraged to look into different places to find it. So see the sunny side up and be kind. Thank you.
Purnima, you are mute. Please unmute yourself.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Sheeba, for your very, very heartening story. It is said that in a war, you don't make the soldiers unhappy, but in spite of all the beating of plates and spoons, doctors and nurses have been stigmatized as super spreaders and ostracized in our communities. Government spending on health must guarantee a safe working environment for all healthcare workers and indeed for all frontline workers. Thank you again, Shiva. Our next speaker is Ms. Angelica Aribam. Angelica is founder of FemFirst Foundation, a non-profit organization to amplify women's political leadership in India. She was named one of Forbes India's 30 under 30 in 2017 for her work on policy and politics. She was the first student from the marginalized northeastern region of India to be elected in the TU Students' Union Executive Committee in 2012. She was also a National General Secretary of the National Students' Union of India and a Fellow for Women Political Leaders at Vital Voices, an American NGO founded by Hillary Clinton. Over to you, Angelica.
Thank you. Brenda, can you please play the video before I begin?
Yes, just give me a second.
Thank you.
Can you see it in the meantime? Of better.
Yeah, people from the Northeast, please shut up. Are you being called a Chinky, Chinese, or Momos? Are you being attacked for spreading coronavirus? Are you being spat on for being corona? Please shut up.
Serious, I'm covering over here also. I'm covering your face. It's not your responsibility, okay? This is not your. I am not talking about you.
They will shame you if you call them out. They will harass you if you report them. They will attack you if you fight back. But in the end, you will. So world, I will shut up. Neither should you.
Thank you so much for playing the video. I'll just give you all a moment to process that. So don't shut up, right? I'd like to tell you the story of how I came to this monumental decision in my life. I was a 12-year-old and had recently moved to New Delhi. It was a hot summer afternoon. I remember I was carrying this heavy school bag and walking from the bus stop. Suddenly, a young man came up to me, groped my barely existent breast. He gave me a creepy smile and uttered, "Chinky." And then he walked away as if nothing happened. I was numb. I stood there frozen. And I didn't know how to react. Though I tried to bury the incident in the recesses of my mind, like we are all advised to and taught to, but I realized I just couldn't do it. It opened my eyes to the extent of discrimination people from my community, and especially women, were facing, because we are often labeled as easy or characterless. It became a moment of reckoning for me, and I decided to not shut up and speak up, to use the power of my voice whenever I could. So it has been more than a decade since that incident, but things have not been really well. There have been incidences of racism across the country against Northeastern people. We leave our homes in search of job opportunities, better education. We come to these big cities with this hope and dream in our eyes, and we feel that, okay, our lives are going to be better. But little did we know when we left home that we are going to be victims of racism. Many lives have been cut short. Nido Tanya, Loitom Richard, Regamfi Aungshi, they were all murdered in the cities. And these are just some of the names. So it definitely goes without saying that racism has always existed in India. But the coronavirus pandemic has led to a sudden spike in the number of incidences of harassment and discrimination of people belonging to the Northeastern community. And I think it's very important for us to understand the reason for this. It is a very well-known fact that COVID-19 originated in Wuhan, China, and many people continue to call it the Chinese virus. And despite the WHO issuing a guideline in 2005 saying that diseases should not be linked with the area from where they originated or named after their region. But many people still continue to call COVID-19 as Chinese virus. And now the continued usage of that term has led to the stigmatization of people who are either from China or who have Mongoloid features. And communities like ours in India, who have always been targeted as Chinese, Chinky, Momos, Chowmin, etc., and etc., continue to bear the brunt of this terminology called Chinese virus. And for example, as we have seen in the video, in Pune, a woman in a supermarket misbehaved with a young lady from Mizoram. In Hyderabad, 2 young men from Manipur were not allowed to enter into the supermarket in the middle of the lockdown to buy essential groceries. And a young lady from Manipur in Delhi was spat on and called Corona. On social media, I fear severe online abuse, and I was called bad eating and chinky, and this sent me this really terrible, horrific, sexual graphic images. And yeah, it's still triggering whenever I think of it. But like I said, these are just few of the examples that people from the Northeast continue to face. More than 80 to 90% of the times, we don't want to report these cases because, who wants to go through the legal hassle of, following up with the courts or going to the police station, and that's an issue. So most of us don't tend to report the cases. The other instance is, in India, we still don't have an anti-racial discrimination law, and which brings us to the point there is no legal remedy for us to fall back into. For example, so despite the severe online abuse and trolling that I faced, I had to file a case with the Delhi police, and not for racism, but for the outraging my modesty as a woman under the Information and Technology Act. So despite it being very evident that I was racially discriminated, there was no law, and there is no law that protects me or my people. So now the question arises, in the absence of a law, what can be done? And I think this is where we all come in as human beings and as a society. And I'm going to tell you a story. So recently, a young man from Manipur reached out to me, and he told me his story. He comes from a very small village in Manipur, born to farmers. He always wanted to be an engineer. So after his 12th exams, his parents sold off all their agricultural land. They sent him to a big city, and paid this hefty education fees and enrolled him in the hostel, and they made him stay there. He was the first person from his village to ever come out and pursue higher education. And he was happy. He was really happy. And he thought he made friends. And in the hostel, all his friends would usually hang out and, you know, pull his leg and call him cheere khane wale, kutte khane wale, you know, and chinky and all of those things. Initially, he resisted, but whenever he told them and spoke up about it, the friends would be like, yeah, we're just pulling your leg, mazak kar rahe, you know that, right? You know, there is no racist intention. And the friends would just ask him to chill out, and he, you know, under pressure, he would chill out with them. Sometimes he would also join his friends and laugh at himself at his own expense. And it came to a point where it became too much for him. So in the second year, after the second year examinations, he couldn't take it anymore. And he started hating himself, and he started hating his own identity, because people were always making fun of him. And, you know, even though they told him it was unintentional, it was just a joke, but then he felt that, okay, my life is not valuable at all. He felt demeaned, and he felt like he was pushed to a point that he wanted to commit suicide. And then this was the moment when he decided that he cannot take it anymore. So he moved back to Manipur, and now he runs a grocery store. The reason I'm telling you this story is the fact that our language matters. Be it calling someone Chinese virus or chinky, even as a joke, you know. Even if there is no racist intention whatsoever in our words, and we just feel like, oh, they're good friends, they wouldn't mind, and we are just friends, it's just a joke. But then those words that we utter, it means a lot to the other person. It could trigger horrific memories. It could cause them to hate themselves so much that it could push them to a point of no return. So we should be very mindful of the harm that we could do knowingly or unknowingly to cause harm to someone else's lives. So let us educate ourselves and speak up whenever we see other people indulging in it. Thank you.
Purnima,
Hello,
Can't hear you.
can you hear me? Yes. Thank you so much, Angelica, for a very, very graphic representation, highlighting the double stigmatization that all people from the Northeast face on a daily basis. According to the politics of the mainstream and the periphery, and now in the COVID context, xenophobia and the hateful othering that you are facing every day. History is replete with the examples of the horrors that are associated with the stigmatization of specific communities based on ethnicity and race. We must not avert our gaze from past instances of great suffering. I'd just like to refer briefly to the slaughter of thousands and thousands of Jews during the Black Death in Europe between 1348 and 52. Based on just rumors being spread that they were the ones causing the bubonic plague by poisoning the wells. It is my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Ms. Geeta Tishamani, Vice President of Sendiko-Seka and Society for the Eradication of Cruelty Animals and co-founder of Wildlife SOS. She is an acting senior wildlife conservationist and animal rights activist. From 1979 to 2020, Sendiko-Seka has grown into Delhi's largest shelter for domestic animals today. Geeta is now focused on developing human-wildlife conflict mitigation strategies to aid the wildlife conservation in India. She is currently a Special Officer of Wildlife Crime Control Bureau, the Government of India. She is also a member of CPS-CEA Committee and a former member of the Central Zoo Authority, Government of India, as well as the Animal Welfare Board of India. Over to you, Geeta.
Have to get me off. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this invitation. It was wonderful to hear Dr. Sheeba and Angelica. And I wonder if my issue would have that much of gripping value as both their talks. The subject of stigmatization in animal welfare, both for the people involved in it and the animals, is a pretty huge subject. Stigmatization was a fact of life even before COVID-19. 41 years ago, when we first started the Friendico's animal shelter under the Defense Colony flyover, and I'd be cleaning the cages and washing them out, a crowd of observers would gather, and I'd be asked why I actually stooped to picking up stray dog shit and clean their pee and poo. It was apparently not respectable for an educated woman to be doing this in public. Quite a few times I had angry people accosting me as I fed the animals their milk or their food, asking me if I didn't feel guilty feeding dogs when there were human beings who were going hungry. The questions might have changed today, but there is still the feeling that it's a waste of resources to care for street dogs or cats, or for working equines like donkeys or ponies, particularly if they're old, handicapped, and not an economic unit anymore. In fact, today, animal welfare has its own complexities and reverse ideologies. Now, Friendico's has been running a mobile veterinary clinic for working equines since 1984. We treat for free wounds, sicknesses, do surgeries in the field, bring disabled animals back to our lifetime care sanctuary in Gurgaon, provide water, blankets, and keens to the animals. We do this for over 2,500 working donkeys, mules, and ponies throughout the rural belt from Delhi to Agra to Bharatpur. We've often had to battle angry protests from leading animal rights organizations that we were perpetuating slavery for domestic animals by running a mobile veterinary clinic for them. So it's a complicated area. Today's dog feeders suffer more than verbal abuse. Last week, a dog feeder lost his life. Not a day passes without someone weeping on the phone to me requesting police help because they've been hit or molested or manhandled by the men of their locality for feeding animals. 90% of dog feeders are women, and they prefer to feed, treat, and care for their street animals when it's darker in the evenings to avoid confrontation, which makes them very vulnerable. There is no escaping the stereotypes that they endure. They are targeted for dirtying the streets, spreading diseases. They're called illogical and irrational if they stand up for animals when animals are kicked or beaten or have acid thrown on them. They're labeled as emotionally bereft, sexually deprived, taunted. Don't they have families at home to care for that they come out to feed animals? That they must be uneducated. They risk human lives for animal lives. To be absolutely blunt, anyone working with animals is always considered to be loopy or deficient in some way, and therefore fair game for angry gangs to victimize. The words compassion or ahimsa or just the philosophy of live and let live apparently has no place here. And the stereotypes are perpetrated every day. But the escalation of violence is what is so alarming. Almost every day these women are beaten up and the police force has to be called in and they are often not responsive. It has to be studied along with road rage as something which is alarming in the city today. I often wondered if institutionalizing this act of kindness, what should essentially be a moment of empathy with creatures not human, this caring for an animal's hunger or pain, I thought perhaps that would help if one created NGOs, hospitals, shelters, a professional army of vets and paravets and trained staff. Could it somehow remove the stigma, make it more acceptable as serving a role in public health? Could it make people understand that the programs we do, for example, the sterilization and vaccination of street dogs, which is a humane and human way of controlling the dog population, giving the public healthy and safe community pets on the street. But I have found in real life, the stigmatization and the stereotyping still endures. There is a permanent fragmentation in the psyche of urban people I have learned to accept. Animals themselves are stigmatized usually as just being dirty or a nuisance. Sometimes as being able to summon the powers of darkness. Witness the poor cat. I wish the cat knew what amazing power it wields over grown men and women. I always thought that people would be less wary of animals as creations of God and nothing to be scared of, but it's not really true. Gone are the days one's grandmother thought about giving a chapati to a cow and thought that was a great way to start a day. Actually, every animal had its place at that time. One threw rice for sparrows, kept a glass of milk for the dog, biscuits for the squirrel, bajra for the pigeons. Nothing was an intruder on our space or time or resources. Today, all animals are intruders. After feeding dogs in my colony for umpteen years, I was told last year I was bringing down property values by attracting stray dogs to sit in front of posh homes. I couldn't think of an appropriate rejoinder immediately, but the guard sitting in that little hut near the gate replied well enough. "Ye rakhwali karte hain, madam," he told the lady, "aur raat ko mujhe jagah dete hain, mere dost hain." I thought, wow, I was looking for an intellectual comeback, but our man said it all so much better. Ironically, the stigmatization apparently doesn't touch dog breeders or the huge market in pedigrees, which is a thriving industry. These status symbols, the Saint Bernards, the Golden Labradors, are discarded at a shelter at the least inconvenience. A prolonged chronic illness, a pet is too much of work, he barks too much, he doesn't bark enough. COVID-19 has been the handiest current excuse for irresponsible pet owners to dump animals in parks, tie them to trees and lampposts. For some reason, metro pillars are a favorite dumping point, and of course at shelters, including Friendicos. We have till now received over 40-50 such dogs. So at first we thought it was fear of animals being linked to the COVID-19 pandemic, fear of the infection itself. But the reasons people gave were diverse. I can't transport it to a vet should it fall sick. I can't walk it, the neighbor's object. I'm not able to go out to buy its food. In other words, it was the stigmatization that was being attached, the fears that were coming with the disease that were making it difficult for them to handle their pets. And therefore, these pets were being abandoned. COVID-19 is a man-made disaster and recalls the work we did in other natural disaster areas. Friendicos has worked in the Gujarat earthquake, the tsunami, the Orissa and Maharashtra floods, but there was a huge difference. People helped us to save animals, worked along with our team, even at the risk of their lives, with the same concern and effort that they helped us save a human being's life. It was my biggest lesson. Faced with such huge calamities, people who had lost everything still had time to help animals. I know the norm is to say, no one was there for the animals, dedicated animal rescue teams are needed. That's a discussion for another day, planned disaster relief for animals. What I'm saying is people who survived had this huge sensitivity and empathy to animal lives. It was as if they suddenly discovered how precious life was, every being's life. I have no idea if that insight lasted them for their lifetime, but it taught me that people are capable of opening their hearts to all living things, to just be kind. But it takes a disaster or a catastrophe sometimes. And I think COVID-19 is also doing just that. Friendicos is feeding over 2,000 street dogs and over 600 cows and monkeys only because of the donations that are supporting us, of the people who feel that we're doing worthwhile work. We meet so many others when we are in the streets, all intent of helping, whether it be people or animals. Hunger is a great leveler. Mridula, who is going to speak today too, must have served thousands of meals to people who needed it. Friendicos served to thousands of hungry animals that needed it. In my eyes, both acts were acts that recognized the value of all life, and both recognized the importance of reaching out to any creature who is hungry and feels abandoned and helpless. At the risk of being stigmatized as just plain loopy myself, I must insist both acts have equal ethical value. Thank you. I have finished, Purnima, and you can take it from here.
Thank you, Geeta. Thank you so much for your wonderful story. You know, listening to you speak suddenly took me back to E.M. Foster's Passage to India. And since, you know, I think you were once teaching English literature, I thought I could refer to that one moment where that elderly Mrs. Moore sees a little wasp sitting on a peg, you know, and she embraces that wasp by saying, "Pretty dear." And Foster uses that little gesture to pose a lot of questions about how much or how little we human beings can include or exclude from our circle of love and compassion. Your story, I mean, makes it absolutely clear how expansive and inspiring and embracing your circle of love is, reaching out to animals that suffer the most. And Foster also talks about, you know, there is this, how far can we go? Can we include the monkey? Do we go down to the amoeba and so on and so forth? So when you were talking about squirrels and sparrows, I mean, I really felt that it's a lesson and it's extremely inspiring for all of us to hear you. And really, I think we have to open our hearts and really expand our circle of love. Thank you very, very much, Ms. Sishamani Geeta. Yes. Our final speaker for the day is Dr. Mridula Tandon. Dr. Mridula Tandon is co-founder and president of Sakshi, a social entrepreneur, a philanthropist, and a medical doctor, and a passionate promoter of Indian cultural arts and literature. She is an executive committee member of Friendico SECA, a member of CSIR's top-level CAIRD Awards Committee, an expert in ICC committees against sexual harassment with Sena Bhavan, AIR HQ, and DRDO. She is also founder of Jashan Hind. Sakshi is a holistic grassroots NGO working with communities from socio-economic margins. Its educational centers offer non-formal education and vocational training, impacting 50,000 women and children every month. Sakshi's work also focuses on women's empowerment, water and sanitation, health and community development. An ancient Buddhist parable called the Parable of the Poisoned Arrow tells how a man who has been shot with an arrow dipped in deadly poison refuses to allow to be treated. He doesn't want the arrow removed. He first wants to know who shot it, from which direction, the class and caste and skin color of the shooter, and the material with which the arrow is composed. So he lies there writhing in pain until he dies. Well, friends, Dr. Mridula Tandon doesn't believe in wasting time. Her credo has always been to spontaneously reach out to help first and to ask questions later. And she's been reaching out to all kinds of people hit with the poison arrows of stigmatization across social distance and now across, you know, all kinds of distances created in the current COVID pandemic. Dr. Mridula Tandon is someone who demonstrates the power of one, how every single person can make a difference. Before I hand over to Dr. Mridula Tandon, I would like to request her to also tell us a little about how Sakshi COVID-19, the relief program, has reached out especially to the migrant workers during this crisis. Dr. Mridula Tandon is also a medical doctor and has been reaching out to a lot of women from the Northeast, I heard, during this time. So perhaps she would like to talk about some of these issues also. So over to you, Dr. Mridula Tandon. Is she here with us, Nabi?
Ma'am, your mic is off. Please switch it on.
Mic. Let's see my mic.
Mridula ma'am, there's a small red button.
I know.
Yeah.
It's come on.
Yes. Now we can hear you.
All right, so thank you very much, Purnima, and everybody in JMC for inviting me to this. I'm in awe of all the speakers who went ahead. Sadly, I could not hear the first speaker, but Geeta, my friend who does incredible work with the animals, I heard completely. She's the reason I can sleep in peace when I've seen an animal in pain. I just have to call her and she takes over. And I know that animal is going to get the best help possible. By the same token, I think this is what we all do in Sakshi. To us, each life is sacred. Whether it is an animal or a human being, it doesn't matter where he has come from or where he is going or what he has done. Because he is there, he is important. Money and fame and fortune, I think, are all accidents of fate. What matters in the end is the person who's there and the person who actually can come out of the help that you give it to them. In terms of the COVID-19 relief program held by Sakshi, I must tell you, I came back today from a program by the district where she complimented and appreciated our work and gave us a significant honor and a certificate to mark the work that we've been doing. Our work started on March 26 when we were watching TV and saw these horrible stories of migrants walking back. And one of the couples who was interviewed had a baby in their arms, 10 months old, 2 little children, luggage on their head, and they were walking from Haryana to Aligarh. And when the TV anchor asked, why are you walking? Why don't you stay here? Their answer was, गांव में कोई 4 रोटी चटनी के साथ दे देगा, शहर में हम भूखे मर जाएंगे. It's truly a reality. We have air conditioned and cocooned ourselves in so much comfort that we are unable to look out and see what's happening on the roads right in front of us. Whether it's a neighbor in pain, a locality in distress next to your own neighborhood, barely anybody actually goes out to respond. We started from that day. We took cooked meals out of the community's individual kitchens. They all answered to my plea. We had 150 meals in the evening to distribute. From that small beginning, we eventually ended up serving around 2,000 to 3,000 meals a day, cooked meals, and around 1,000 kilos of dry rations every day to those who had cooking facilities. We were able to move a number of migrants who wanted to go in thousands to their villages. We also tried to motivate and counsel an equal number to stay back, because when they went there, they would still face the reality of not having enough. And then they would want to come back. A lot of them stayed back, whom we are sustaining still. So what we have done is, for those who have gone to their villages, we've told them not to come back. Whenever they call us and ask that they would like to return, we say, we will sustain you where you are. Please don't take on the danger of coming back with all the rampant COVID-19 infection. And when you come here, and if you're ill, there's no one to look after you. And the situation is still not opened out for you to be able to go safely to a job. We provide them with rations exactly where they are, not with money. Only the rations, making sure that it's just enough for them to eat and not enough to trade. By the same token, those who are here, whether it was the mochi or the dhobi or the local presswala, all these small tradespeople included, we are trying to make certain that they are able to keep a roof over their heads, able to put a little food out for themselves and their children. And when the economy opens up and people start looking for their services again, they are here to help. It is a community which is actually standing on a framework which is supported by such people. Yet, in times of emergency, when we have to isolate ourselves, one of the first people who are hit are these smaller, marginal people whose wages are cut or not given at all, who are supposed to survive on whatever they saved, which is practically nothing. I think everybody can make such a difference, as Purnima said, with the power of one. I did not really know my own community because I work with Sakshi, which caters to a much larger base. But I sent out this one call of help to a few friends that I need a couple of cooked meals by the evening, each meal to have 6 chapatis and sukhi sabzi and pickle. If with that one call I was able to get so much help, today we have a community of 150 caring individuals and an initiative called Each One Feeds Someone. Not anyone, just someone, so that you're able to do something. This group has managed to collect together and do enormous good work, and is really an example of how one person at a time cooking in their own kitchen or just contributing a little bit towards one person's welfare can change communities. When you look around, whether it is feeding animals, you can take the one chapati out of your plate when you're having dinner and give it to an animal, whether it is a cow or a dog. You can put out a little water and some grain for those birds which need it. Similarly, you should not encourage begging, but by the same thought process, you should actually try and help the children because they have nowhere to turn to. And if those children are given some food and a place where they can feel safe, they will truly, truly turn out to be much more responsible citizens. And what you do is for your own self, for your own community, because unless you ensure safety and food and shelter for those who are without, tomorrow we will be living in a society which has become much more criminal and much more dangerous, because these people who today are God-fearing, law-abiding, only asking for the minimum, will tomorrow turn around and start snatching. And who will be to blame? Who is the person who is eventually going to say that, yes, we were responsible? We can't look at the government for doing everything. We can't look at the law. The law are words. It has to be put into action by people who actually understand it. So to turn those words into an actionable sequence is for people like the JMC girls, the students here, who have the benefit of a brilliant education and teachers who can show them the path. Where stigma is concerned, I'm particularly concerned because a public health crisis will always bring something across which is going to give you a little bit in terms of fear. But in the COVID-19 case, the fear and the disinformation has been so enormous. Everybody has become a PhD in the treatment, the spread, and the prevention of COVID. Basic, small, common sense procedures are all that are needed to keep COVID-19 at bay. Like one very famous doctor said, COVID-19 has a very big ego. It's not going to come to you unless you invite it into your home. But people will look at somebody, the Northeasterner, for instance, look at their features and say, "Are ye Chini hai? Wahin se aaya hai. Inse baat mat karo." They will look at an animal and they will say, "Ki janwaron se phailta hai." How is that possible? Who has given them all this extensively deep knowledge? So I think when we spread messages on WhatsApp, it is much safer not to send a forward, which could do a lot of damage and a lot of mischief. In my own case, when we were doing all this donation and collection drive, there were messages which would be constantly sent or videos showing how badly the donated food is being used or sold or thrown. I had to explain over and over again that yes, these things are possible, but if you have the correct knowledge and if you know where you are giving, it will not happen because you will be going through a system which verifies the beneficiary before giving it there. To me, knowledge has always been power, whether it is with this particular crisis in COVID-19 or whether it is with the work we do in Sakshi, where we work with marginalized and economically deprived communities, the construction worker, the rag picker, the scrap picker. And we take children who are very young, take them through non-formal education, give them remedial education, put them into mainstream schools. We give them midday meals to make certain that the one meal in the day which they are able to take through us will give them enough nourishment, not only for physical growth, but also for mental development. We look after their health. We also work with women. We do self-help groups. We look after women's health, and we work with water and sanitation, building toilets, making children learn about how to use these toilets and using various models for behavior change. Talking about Sakshi would be a huge time-consuming thing, so we will do that another time. But pertinent here is that we also run the Women's Helpline with the Delhi Commission for Women. Any woman, whether she feels victimized herself or is the object of assault, verbal, physical, mental, any kind, has the liberty to call 181. It is a centralized helpline. Once your call goes in there and is logged, you will get an NGO to answer you within 20 to 30 minutes. There will be maybe the SHO or the beat constable of the area. There will be the social counselor from the NGO, and there will be a home guard to help with whatever situation is at hand. This is not just a one-time thing. It continues because after the call has been logged and the call has been answered, we also write for the follow-up to happen, whether it's legal, whether it is physical shelter, whether it is medical help. So across the board, a woman, once she calls 181, is assured of help of every kind in whatever situation she is. Please do remember this number, 181, and use it not just for yourself, for anyone you feel is in need of it. Purnima, I think I must have spoken a lot longer than I was supposed to. So if you like, I can wrap up now. All I want to say is that where the stigma of COVID is concerned, please be assured COVID will not come to you unless and until you invite it by using unhygienic, unsafe practices. Otherwise, even a person like me has been going out into the community every day for long hours. And touch wood, COVID should not happen because it doesn't just come across unless you do something which invites it in. Keeping your hands gloved, using the hand sanitizer, washing your hands frequently, wearing outer garments which you can take off as soon as you're about to enter your home. All these are practices which will keep COVID at bay. And of course, wearing a mask, wearing it correctly, which means you don't touch the outside of a mask. You only use it from here. The outside of the mask contains all those contaminants and germs which you're trying to not inhale, which means they're concentrated here. So every time you touch the outer surface, you're dirtying your own hands. I would like to just say that where the other speakers were concerned, I would agree completely with most of what they said. And I will add to what Geeta says that animals do not carry COVID. And they've proven not to do so. Abandoning them is actually one of the hardest things that we have seen happening, along, of course, with the migrant labor, which has walked for miles without water, without comfort, without sustenance, only because we were not able to think in time and tell them, don't go. If one family was supported by 5 families together, this would not have happened. We just had to reach out a hand to those construction sites nearby and talk to them and say, ki bhaiya, aapke liye khana hum pahuncha denge. It did not happen. And yet we live in a land where Kabir says, Sai itna dijiye, jame kutum sambhai. Main bhi bhukha na rahun, sadhu na bhukha jaye. Which is to say, oh Lord, give me enough so that my own family continues to be able to eat and I'm able to provide for another person on the road. Purnima?
Thank you so much, Dr. Mridula Tandon. I mean, it's really wonderful to hear you. I think I got logged out for a minute, but I'm back again. And before I hand over to my colleague, Ms. Ishita Singh, for the Q&A session, let me thank all the 4 speakers once again. We are all aware that women face pressures that men simply don't, and therefore it is doubly inspiring to hear such exceptional and compelling stories of resilience, resistance, and agency shared by all of you today. These women fighting in the front lines of COVID, today, of course, completely debunk all myths linked with gender stigmatization and stereotyping also. But that is the stuff, I think, of another webinar, which we can hold once, we are on the other side of this COVID pandemic. Over to you, Ishita, for the Q&A session. Thank you very much again.
Thank you, Purnima ma'am. With this, we now move on to the question and answer session. At the beginning of the webinar, we had requested you to post your questions to the speakers in the chat box here or in the comments section on YouTube. We've also received a lot of questions from you in the Google Forms. However, due to limitations of time, we'll only be able to take up one question per speaker. If we have time left at the end, we can take up a few more. Since Dr. Marwah had to leave the webinar early, we will not be able to take up questions addressed to her. So we will begin the... Oh, you're here?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. So just give me a second, ma'am, then. Okay, so because there were a lot of questions addressed to you, so I'll just, dig them out. Ma'am, I think we'll begin with the questions for Angelica, ma'am. And we can come back, come back to you, circle back to you. Okay, so let's begin the Q&A with Ms. Aribam. This is a question from the Google form. So this is an anonymous question. This is by a participant who's asking that we've seen that during this pandemic, all the fractures in our society have become glaringly clear. Thank you for articulating the plight of the people from the Northeast, which has not been covered in the mainstream media amply. Are there any helplines or organizations that are working towards helping Northeast students in lockdown while they're alone in Delhi away from home? And is there a platform where they can reach out to seek help? Over to you, Ms. Aribam.
Okay. So there is, in the beginning of the pandemic and the lockdown, there was a lot of concern because a lot of the people here, being students and being away from home, they didn't have resources to manage the groceries and all. So initially what had happened was each of the state governments from these 8 states had set up a sort of a helpline, each states, on their own, not a collaborative effort. So each of the states, like for example, if I'm from Manipur, I could reach out to the Manipur, Manipur Bhavan, the resident commissioner, and I could go to the website or the WhatsApp number and ask, give them my address, give them my phone number, and ask for the groceries to be sent over to my house. So this was something that each of the state governments was doing initially. Then later on, it came to a point where the families back home were really concerned about their children being out here on their own and in the heat of the entire, debacle. So then the state governments, facilitated travel free of cost entirely to each of the states as well. So they took back around 20,000 people from different parts of India, specifically to Manipur. Then they took people to Assam, to Arunachal Pradesh, etc. So the state governments have been really proactive in this entire measure, and they have been running helplines, etc., to help everyone out here. I think I answered your question with that.
Thank you, Ms. Aribam. Okay, so the question for Dr. Shiva Marwa is that are there any specific precautions or measures that can be taken by expecting women and especially for their newborn children?
Yeah, the expecting women, they must continue with the same precautions as highlighted by all others. And the different point of care is that they should not meet many people as otherwise they would have done in the normal 9 months of duration of pregnancy duration. And they should try to restrict their movements and be self-confined to home. And even other relatives should not be encouraged to meet them. If they have some comorbidities, then they should be even extra precautious. And otherwise, the routine maternity services, the antenatal care, it continues the same way. And their visits, they are rescheduled. We don't call them so frequently. Rather, they are called only. The doctors are connected by the with the expecting women through phone and through teleconsultation. And only when they have some problem, they are asked to come to the nearby hospital, and in case of emergency, or the routine antenatal visit. And after delivery and for the newborns, breastfeeding is advised even for normal patients and who are suffering from COVID positive coronavirus disease. And only they have to maintain, they have to do is that they have to practice hand hygiene, and they should always mask themselves, and they should take respiratory precautions as well.
Thank you, Dr. Marwah. The next question is to Ms. Geeta Seshumani. Ms. Seshumani, this is someone who has a personal experience of having both a pet and a COVID-19 infected patient at home. So this participant has asked how can we treat our pets better while we are busy in our caregiving duties towards COVID-19 infected patients at home, and especially considering that some people did abandon their pets in the very early stages of the pandemic. So how do we take on this extra role of caregiving?
I quite understand the problem. And in fact, we have at the moment got at least 9 dogs from households who are COVID-19 positive. And they had no relatives or friends to whom they could send the animals. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible. Yes, you're audible.
So we have been taking care of them, and we have taken as many precautions as we could when we were handling the animals, giving them their bath and sanitizing, taking them through the sanitization tunnel. Our vets have been working without a break, except for one day on March 24th. We have kept our hospital open throughout. And I must say my boys are real heroes because they did not flinch one bit when they had to go out in the streets to do the dog feeding. They just took all the precautions with masks and gloves, and they felt it was their duty and they did it. We've been having days of 24/7 days, 11 p.m. sleeping, 4 a.m. waking up. And I think taking care of animals from such households becomes part of our duty. And we have been doing it. If any, you see, when these animals are abandoned with us, we have no way of knowing if they've come from a COVID-19 positive household anyway. So we had to think of a procedure right from the very start when we were handling them. And that's what we've done. And we are not saying no to any animal brought to us under these circumstances. Does that answer the question? Did I get it right?
I think that answers the question right. Okay, so this is a question to now Dr. Tandon. Thank you, Ms. Seshumani. This is a question to Dr. Tandon now. This is someone who's asking in the Google form, as a person of privilege, that is, someone who can afford to stay indoors, whose income is not affected by the pandemic at this point in time, pretty much a lot of us in this situation. What must be done not to feel guilty of enjoying this as a COVID vacation? And how can we as individuals contribute towards the help that is being done, being provided by NGOs?
Well, there are 2 things I think to this. One is, what does your own inner self say? Are you going to just continue to live in a cocoon which doesn't meet with the real world, or do you actually have the sensitivity and the empathy to even understand from the visuals which come on the TV screen or through media about the plight which is affecting more than 90% of our population? If you know that just having a shelter, good food and clean water is a privilege, anything over that is an extra. If you want to help, we can't all of us step out. That's what I'm saying, it's the power of one. You by yourself are able to help. If you are living in a colony where it's a systematized colony, then they are the guards, they are the domestic workers, they are others. You could probably get together with the others and make meals to serve the guard so that he doesn't have to go home and then look for food. Or you could get together and contribute towards providing rations to those domestic workers who were working within your apartments or colony and have been laid off because either there were too many servants in that particular household, or they're coming as daily wagers who come from outside. In either case, they would appreciate the help. If you are not able to do that and you're a person who knows sewing, you could ask for cloth or use the cloth in your own home, make masks and distribute it to those you know would appreciate such a thing, and teach them. Create awareness about what is COVID-19, how is it spread, how can you prevent it, what are the precautions needed. If you have a little bit of, getting together on one platform with 3 or 4 people, you can do a lot of good. But even if you're alone, this is something which you're easily able to do. Provide for people around you, look for ways to help senior citizens near you who may be in need and who can't even get online to order what they need to order. There are extensive ways when you actually put your mind to it in which you can do this without stepping out of your home, without spending money. If you can spend money, use it wisely, give it where it will do the maximum good. Does that answer it?
I think so. Thank you, Dr. Tandon. I think, it's 5:22, so I think that's, we should, be wrapping it up now. So I think, unfortunately, that is all that we have time for today. Thank you all for your questions, comments, and active participation. This brings us to the end of this webinar. I'd now like to request Dr. Alka Marwah, IQAC Coordinator for Jesus and Mary College, to kindly give the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Ishita. On behalf of IQAC, faculty and principal of Jesus and Mary College, I have the pleasant duty of thanking so many of my colleagues who have been instrumental in making today's webinar a great success. I begin by thanking the esteemed panelists for today's webinar for sharing their personal experiences specific to the challenges that have cropped up with the COVID pandemic, ranging from the vicissitudes of the healthcare frontline workers, racism associated with the northeastern citizens, the plight of animal welfare helpers, and last but not the least, the hardships faced by the underprivileged sections of society, such as women, children, and migrant workers. All of us who have listened to your heartrending stories have not only been sensitized about the brutal realities, but in fact have felt inspired to bring about a change at a personal and societal level. Thank you once again for being with us and sharing your insights. Next, I wish to acknowledge the time, effort, and energy spent by so many people in making this virtual seminar a reality. I begin by extending my heartfelt thanks to Ms. Dolly Kapoor, the teacher in charge of English department, for organizing such a significant webinar. This would not have been possible without the unstinted support of her colleagues from the department, Ms. Purnima Togden, who has also done a wonderful job of moderating the webinar, Dr. Sharon Pillay, Ms. Jennifer Montero, and Ms. Ishita Singh, who also deserves a special word of thanks for executing a very engaging and interactive question-answer session. Once again, thanks to English Department on behalf of IQAC for putting up this webinar as a grand finale to the series of webinars that has been going on in the past 2 months. Before I move on to thanking the webinar team, I would like to express my deep gratitude and thankfulness to our dear principal, Dr. Sister Rosalie, for always being a pillar of support and a constant source of encouragement and motivation. Sister, without your mentorship, wisdom, and blessings, it would not have been possible for us to organize such meaningful webinars during the lockdown period. I now wish to thank, from the bottom of my heart, the webinar team headed by Dr. Amita Motwani, who has done a fabulous job of forming the webinar committee and then setting the ball rolling for these online webinars. Thanks are due to the young, vibrant faculty members comprising the webinar committee, Dr. Shruti Tohan, Ms. Charu Serene, Ms. Monica Chabra, Dr. Naveen Thomas, Ms. Brinda Moda, Ms. Megha Jacob, Dr. Shikha Singh, Ms. Ishita Singh, and also Mr. Gaurav Verma, the IT consultant from administration, for successfully organizing over 20 webinars in the past 2 months. The team has not only acquired technical expertise to host webinars on virtual platforms, but has created a wonderfully harmonious atmosphere to work in. On a more personal note, I am also immensely grateful to my senior colleagues and friends, Dr. Amita Motwani, Dr. Renu Gupta, Dr. Rekha Dayal, Dr. Reena Marwaha, Dr. Sunita Kayastha, and Dr. Vibha Mathur for their continued support and guidance, and also to Dr. Anju Luthra, Dr. Dinesh Adlakha, Dr. Indrakshi Dutta, Ms. Shalini Srivastava, Ms. Purnima Topton, Ms. Rajni Singh, Ms. Dolly Kapoor, and Dr. Alka Sehgal for taking initiative to organize some of the most amazing webinars on varied topics. It's not possible for me to name everyone, but I do wish to acknowledge their invaluable support, role in making this webinar series a great success. So thank you all for making this journey through the lockdown period so enjoyable and a great learning. My vote of thanks will remain incomplete if I don't express my gratitude to all of you who have shown such keen participation. So thank you all for being such a wonderful audience. Wish you all a very pleasant day. Stay safe. Stay healthy.